good.
Hollywood.
Pretty good, yeah.
I'm sorry. And as noted in our advertisement, it has to do with Chinese medicine. Scott is the founder of the Acupuncture Medical Center. Been here since 2000. And he's received some fairly intense training, both domestically and
South Korea.
And so, and his teachers, or what's proper as a teacher? Or?
Yeah, in Korea and Taiwan, they don't call doctors. Doctors are teachers.
His teacher is not so well known in this country, but in Southeast Asia, he's very well known. We were talking a little bit about it earlier. How I stumbled on to this is Scott, they had Dirty Dan Days going on.
Oh yeah, our booth.
Dirty Dan Days, and I was walking around, and Scott's business had a booth set up there, and I just happened to be walking by, and I was just looking and started talking, and then the light bulb went off, and he's been gracious enough to accept our invitation to come teach a class tonight, so we're very happy to have him here. Anything else I need to bring up?
That's about it.
I haven't stumbled too badly.
I think you did fine.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
All right, thank you, Dave, for inviting me here, and thank you all for coming tonight. Yeah, I got my start in Bellingham in 2000. We were located at the corner of Mill and 11th Street, right where the bookstore used to not be. So any of you guys are that old in Bellingham. And we started out with 2 rooms there, and then we switched about 8 years ago to our location on between Holly and Broadway on Astor Street. And so we jumped from 2 to 7 rooms. And so as far as Chinese medical clinics go, it's kind of odd, but we run one of the busiest in the country out of Bellingham. Pretty funny, huh? Yeah, and then my mentor is actually in Poulsbo, Washington, and he has the largest clinic in the country. Yeah, little tiny town of Poulsbo. They see 600 to 700 patients a week.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're the largest medical facility in the Kitsap Peninsula at this point. And so it's interesting with Chinese medicine because unless you've had access to it, it sounds kind of weird, right? Come on, raise your hands. Who thinks it sounds kind of weird? It definitely does. And how I came into Chinese medicine was I went to South Korea to teach English, and then when I got over there, I got very sick, and I was hospitalized with dysentery. And about a month later, I got hospitalized again, this time bleeding dysentery. And then the third time I was hospitalized. Has anybody been in a third world hospital?
No.
This is a scene that you might find familiar. So I'm in bed, I'm hooked up to everything, and I'm like, I just want to go home. And the doctor says, he's looking in his book, because this was a town of 10,000. They had no idea how to speak real English. And so he said, you're on no-fly list. Oh, this is good news. And I said, but it seems to me you guys don't know what's wrong. And he says, yes. And I said, this is terrible. So his colleague came in, and he says, okay, diagnosis. I said, good, what is it? He says, rhinitis. And he said, rhinitis. And then the other guy looks at him, and he goes, rhinitis. In Korean, because I spoke some Korean, he says, he understands us. And he says, sinusitis. And I'm like, good, okay. And then bronchitis. And then we go with the dysentery. And then we go with multiple unknown infections. So I said, excellent. So anyways, I went home. And about 48 hours later, my roommate found me in bed. And he said, okay, we're done with this stuff. And cleaned me off. And he said, we're going upstairs to see the teacher. And I said, I don't want to see any teacher. I'm going to die right here. And he said, we're going upstairs now. And it was really interesting. Do you guys know anything about Korean culture? Okay. Every single formal meeting in Korea starts with a drink called soju. Have you guys ever had soju? It's a chemically produced alcohol. I'm allergic to it. I take one sip and I just start burning everywhere. So I never went near the stuff. So we go upstairs and I see this guy sitting on the floor and I think, oh, he's the teacher, excellent, I don't care anymore. And I sat down and he says, drink. And I went, oh God, all right. And I reach for the glass, and as I do, I see this lady watching me through the other room, and I'm like, oh, this is funny. And as soon as I put it to my lips, she comes running out. She goes, oh man, our children, stop drinking, you idiot. And I put it down, and she looked at me, and she says, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know, that's the problem. And she says, I know. And I said, what? She says, you are unable to care for yourself.
You need a woman.
Yeah, so,
I have a daughter.
I was 25 at the time. Now I'm in my mid-40s, but I couldn't argue with her. I was just like, yes, this is pretty obvious at this point. And then she said something that's very interesting to me. She says, you're our first Westerner to ever live in this town. And I said, yeah. And she says, if you die, how do you think we'll feel? And I said, I don't care how you feel. We're concerned how I feel. She says, no, this is American way. She says, American, you think of yourself. She says, if you die on us, it would be a shame for the rest of this city's history. And she says, so now, I have to take care of you, and I'm not happy about this. So I said, okay, what are we going to do? And she says, acupuncture. And I said, oh, great, like the Kung Fu movies. And she looks at me, and she's just like, in Korean, she mentions the word mental illness. And so I lean back, she gives me a treatment, and I didn't really feel anything. I felt the same, basically. I still felt completely awful. And before I left, she looked at me, and she says, there's American promises and Korean promises. We're about to make a Korean one. And I said, what's a Korean promise? She says, you will eat every breakfast and every dinner with my husband and I, or I will not treat you. And I asked her why. And she says, well, it's obvious you're going to screw up my work. And so the next morning, I overslept, of course, because I was so sick. And I get this knocking on my door, bang, 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 bang. And this little kid says, teacher wants you, teacher, very angry. It's just like, oh God. So I fell back asleep. Anyways, I get up, it's around 9:30, I go upstairs, and there's, her husband's nickname was Mongo. So there's Mongo on the floor. Are there any Italian Catholics in here? Me too. I thought the Italian Catholics were the black belts in guilt. We're not.
No, we're good at it.
We're good at it, but
Roman Catholic.
yeah, Roman Italian Catholic, that's how I was raised. So we're good, but the Koreans are the ninja assassins. So I walk in there, there's Mongo staring at his bowl of food.
And honey,
He could not eat it. And so I sit down, and then she looks at me, and she says, give me your bowl. I will heat yours up, and he will eat his cold, because you're late. So we ate our breakfast, and then at the end, Mongo's very angry, and he looks up, and he goes, don't be late. And then I said, okay. And anyways, that evening I went back to her house. She gave me another treatment, and then after a couple of weeks, I actually started to feel better, and started to get more energy, and I started to feel different, less dizzy, wasn't, having issues otherwise. And so anyways, I asked her if I could start studying this. And she says, well, that would be like a circus show. And I said, what do you mean? She says, white guy studying acupuncture? We've never heard of this. And I thought, well, I still want to do it. And so anyways, I started studying with her. And so over the next 9 months, basically, I ate breakfast with her, dinner with her, and then we worked at night. It's interesting in Korea, there was a Western medical clinic. There was a government acupuncture clinic, and then she was the bootleg clinic. Her family had always been there. And so the Western medical clinic was busy. The government acupuncture clinic was a dead zone. Every time I had to walk by there on the way to her house, and her house was always just packed with people. So she was a third-generation doctor. Her schooling was her father's and grandfather's teaching her. And so anyways, that's how I really got into this medicine. When I came back to Arizona, I was teaching English as a second language and working with at-risk kids. And just as a joke one night, you know, I pulled up this new thing called the internet. And I remember typing in, you know, Chinese medicine. And it turned out there was 48 or 50 schools back then. And I thought, I could do this for a living, so why not? Put in my notice at the school and got into school in Portland. So anyways, that's how I came into the medicine. Does that make sense? A lot of acupuncture clinics I've been to in the West, they look at the medicine as, you know, I'll fix your elbow, I'll fix your knee. Because I came to it in such a strong way, we always see it as a collaborative care with Western medicine. And so when I opened the clinic in 2000, you know, I hand wrote a letter to 26 pages of MDs introducing myself, and 2 responded. And I said, great, I've got 2 people to talk to. You guys ever meet Dr. Yin?
From Canada?
He was Canadian.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
And-
I may have.
may have. He was a pain specialist, and he was a doctor here. Extremely kind, very, very, very interesting, smart guy. And over the first year here, I would come to his office on a day, and he'd come to my office on Fridays, and we shadowed each other. And it was really an interesting introduction to Bellingham, because he would bring me into the pain center, and we would work on different patients and talk about different patients. He ended up moving because his mother got sick, and then in Chinese culture, you know, he went up to go take care of her. So it was kind of an interesting segue into Bellingham and then Western medicine.
Did you ever work with Dr. Wu?
No, I never worked with him. I know who he is, but yeah. Yeah, so that's how I got here. So how many of you have heard about acupuncture before? You just gotta raise your hands. How many of you have had acupuncture before? Okay, now this is where it gets fun. Have you ever asked them how it works?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, what did they say?
Be quiet. Stay there. I will do it.
Yes. You know, that's the same answer.
I'm sorry, but that's pretty much
No, that's
what
what you got. Well, you're lucky. It gets much worse than that.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, see, when I was in Korea, and I was talking with Dr. Park, I would ask her, I'd say, what are we doing here? And she would say, we're directing blood to the area. And I thought, that's interesting, that makes sense to me. Why? That's how the body responds to inflammation. I said, good, I can figure this out. So when I got back to America, I signed up for Chinese medical school in Portland, and there's 2 schools considered the best in the country. I went to the Portland one because all the buddies I grew up with were living in Boston at the time. And I said, I'm not going to go back to there. I'll never get out of that place alive. So off to Portland I went. And the very first day of school, the teacher out there, Dr. Wei Li, she's a 5th generation doctor, she starts talking about these things called meridians. Have you guys heard about the meridian thing? And she's talking about this, that was my face. You see that face right there? That was my face. And she's talking about the meridian thing. And I raised my hand. I said, Dr. Lee, I got a question for you. And she said, what's your question? And who are you? Why are you interrupting me on the first day? And I said, my question is this, because I've done translation work. I said, when you're translating from Chinese to English, you can't get bored and start throwing in French. And the room was just like this. And she looked at me and she said, you bring up a very good point. And then I had this shocking feeling of horror. I did. I look at the front cover of my Chinese medical textbook, and it's Blue Plum Press. And I close the book, and I start rummaging through all my other books, and she's just staring at me, like wondering what the heck I'm doing. I came from a lot of people in my family are academics. And so if it's a valid textbook, it's a university press. It's not, you know, David's House of Cards.
Oh, you know.
I've seen your books. And so I sat there with this look on my face, and it was funny because she must have known something was up, because she says, come to my office after the class and we'll talk. And I just thought, oh my God, I just wasted all my money. I gave up my job.
And she's gonna kick you out.
And so anyways, I came up to her and I said, okay, I don't understand this meridian thing. And she says, homework assignment number 1, look up the word chi. Have you guys heard this word chi? What do you guys think chi means?
Center.
Center, sometimes energy, right? All this type of stuff. Who said that? Someone said. What did he say? Oh, there's the word Daiqi, which is an ancient Chinese word. I was like, I didn't know Daiqi. That's pretty cool. So anyways, if you look up the word qi in the dictionary, there's 500 definitions. You know what the last one is? Means energy in the West. Yeah. The very first time the word qi appears in Chinese medical literature, it's from this paragraph. And this is a book that's 3,800 years old. From the air, the lung extracts vital qi. The French translator, Célie de Moran, knew it was oxygen, but wrote in energy. That's what got me interested in this whole Chinese medicine in the West, because what's practiced here is not at all like what's practiced in actual Asia. But you have Asian teachers teaching us this brand of crazy medicine. And so I got in a lot of trouble a lot of times. But I got interested in all this stuff. So I looked into the translations. Célie de Moran lived in France from 1901 to 1920. In 1920, the Chinese went into their period of seclusion. They started kicking people out. And then basically from 1930 to 71, nobody got in or out. And they were cut off completely from the world. And in that time, Célie de Moran went back to France and started practicing acupuncture. And the doctors got interested, and they said, well, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm doing acupuncture. And they said, great, can you teach us? It looks interesting. And so he started teaching them. And then they asked him, can you write some books on this? Great, I'll write some books on it. Can you open some schools on it? Yeah, I'll open some schools on it. And so because of Célie de Moran, all the translations in English are French-based. And they have a lot of French concepts. Now, when you look back in hindsight, this is disastrous because Célie de Moran was a debutante. He was not a doctor. So you have a guy with no medical training writing medical books. You want to know what's even more fun? He couldn't read classical Chinese. He had no idea. He just made this stuff up. He would look at the classical Chinese and go, it's close enough, and he would write these things because he has all these journals he kept. Classical Chinese is so specific, there's only 200 people alive that can read it. You can't just fake it. That's why when I was reading a lot of the Chinese classics in English, they made no sense to me. It'd be like the purple moon phases east, use lung 7. And then you'd have these books written about the marvelous purple mountain. Do you guys get it? They were trying to find meaning where it was just gobbledygook. This guy had no idea how he was translating anything. That's pretty wild, huh?
Wow. But it set a precedent.
Yeah. And the Chinese never proofed this stuff until 71. You know, Nixon, that whole thing, his photographer got appendicitis, and then they used acupuncture as anesthesia. And that's what got the world so interested in this. So our first line of doctors went to China in 71, and one of my professors, Dr. Liu, his dad was in that first line of doctors that met the Americans. And Dr. Liu, after I graduated, he says, my dad still talks about that first meeting. The Western doctors came over. He says, but they didn't look like doctors, they looked like hippies. Right? 'Cause this would be the doctors who were interested, right, in the energy medicine. He says, they all came over talking about the meridians and the energy and stuff. And he says, and we figured they must know something we don't. And there's a process called redaction, where after a period of time, because you think a group is superior, you adopt their terminology even though you know it's wrong. So within 5 years, the Chinese were teaching about meridians and qi and energy and all this craziness. And so now what we have happening in America is when you go see an acupuncturist and you ask them, how does this work? And they say, oh, I know I can't go down the energy road because I can't defend it. So you just sit there. I'll put in these needles and we'll see what happens. Yeah, so that's the problem with Chinese medicine is when you ask 99% of the people, that's what you get as your answer. Oh, it's, we're working with the meridians, we're working with the energy. So just in a word, this is what Célie Moran did. He took us from blood vessels and oxygen to energy and magic energy highways. Does that make sense, you guys? Yeah. So anytime you're speaking Chinese medicine, for 4,950 years, it was all about blood flow until we got hold of it. In fact, that book I was talking about, the Huangdi Neijing, is 3,800 years old. in that book, they were talking about the autopsy studies they had done. They had weighed out the average pancreas, the average lung. They had dissected the vascular system. This is incredibly specific medical knowledge. It's not at all some new age, hippie thing where they're like, oh, if you have a cough, chew on this. It's very specific to this is the vascular system, this is the cardiac system. And they even mapped out how the different organs affect each other in terms of blood flow. So part of the disservice I see with Chinese medicine in the West is we made it this idiotic medicine thing, energy thing. And so we have a lot of involvement with the MDs in town because this is our language that we talk. I'm also very good friends with 1 to 200 people that can read classical Chinese. And that's how